It's not very often I get tingles this strong. I have really been looking forward to filming this video. Morning guys, and welcome back to the channel. A few weeks ago I went on to AliExpress and noticed that San Martin had released a new watch. Okay, nothing new there, but this one is in a style that I particularly enjoy, so I bought one immediately. I am very lucky. San Martin do send me a lot of free watches to review for you guys, but I wasn't going to wait around for this one. I bought it immediately and it has now arrived. Frank is looking after it for me until I head over to the Lightbox and unbox it and share with you my first impressions. And as you can see, Frank is wearing an MM300 and on my wrist I've got an MM200, so you may already have an inkling of what might be inside that green box. So yeah, let's not hang around any longer. I can't wait. Let's get over to the Lightbox and unbox this thing and take a look. Well, I want to start by addressing that noise I made at the end of the intro. Proof perhaps that my introductions aren't scripted. Yeah, I was so excited about seeing this watch for the very first time. Here it is, that I came out here and filmed the introduction without making a cup of tea first. I normally don't operate very well without a cup of tea, but yeah, I just couldn't wait to see this thing. And this is it, the SN0087, and yeah, I suspect a lot of you are looking at it and thinking, what's all the fuss? But oh man, it just looks so good. I love this case shape. It is a monoblock as well, which is very much in keeping with the MM300 over there. Interesting story behind that one and how I came to acquire it. I don't think I'm going to cover it in this video. Basically, I bought that by accident. I thought I was buying something else. And it was only when I looked at my credit card statement that I realised I'd bought something quite a bit more expensive than the watch I intended on buying. But I just couldn't bring myself to return it because, oh man, this thing is incredible. This is an MM200 that I bought in a sale. Yeah, it actually came on a rubber strap, and this is an aftermarket stainless steel bracelet. But yeah, basically, I love this style of watch. I think Seiko produces some incredible cases and case shapes, and that is one of the main appeals for me. Yeah, it looks interesting, doesn't it? Right, let's get the plastic off and have a good look. Right, it's now been resized and here it is on my roughly average sized wrist. I've been able to get a perfect fit because there are 4 levels of micro adjustment in the clasp. Unfortunately, it's not coming with their new on-the-fly adjustment system. I suspect this watch was designed and produced prior to that clasp being available. This watch actually would have been the perfect watch for it because that clasp is a little bit bigger, a little bit heavier, and yeah, this watch could certainly carry it. It is not a small watch, but then you wouldn't expect it to be when it's paying homage to, well, watches like this. You may be wondering, why am I actually saying Seiko in this video? Well, I've got the watches in front of me, so I feel comfortable saying it. And if you're wondering why I sometimes don't talk about the watches that watches like this are paying homage to, head down to my video description. I've put an explanation in there. Yeah, I like it. I like it a lot. I was drawn to the case shape. I knew the finishing would be good, the style of watch, obviously, but primarily the color combination as well. Black with gilt accents. Just looks awesome, doesn't it? It is a bit bigger than I was expecting, but yeah, it's not disappointing. And yeah, the finishing is fantastic. Let me show you. Well, I think the best place to start is around the back, because you've got some very large surfaces, a huge brushed surface on the back of the watch, which you'd want because, well, if ever you put this watch down anywhere, yeah, it's going to get scratched up, and you're going to see that far more clearly if the back of the case was polished. But you do have huge polished flanks underneath the case. I mean, these actually sit under the case. Look, you do have some fairly large polished surfaces down the side or sort of on top of the case. You've got brushing on the actual top of the case, but yeah, it's a really interesting case design, isn't it? I love it, absolutely love it. And yeah, the quality of the polishing does seem good. I've spoken about it in the past. San Martin are using lapping machines with tin plates, or the factories that are producing these watches are. for some of the finishing. I suspect it's not all being polished with lapping machines with tin plates because, yeah, you can't polish every surface on a watch using that technique. That technique is also known as Zaratsu polishing, and of course that is a term coined by Seiko and Grand Seiko, and yeah, there's no denying. This watch actually has Zaratsu polishing on it, so I'll show you these two watches side by side in a minute. But yeah, lots and lots of factories and watch companies use a very similar, if not identical method. It's just obviously they don't say Zaratsu polishing because that is something that yeah, Grand Seiko have coined, or a term that they have coined. And of course, I'm not saying that this watch is finished to the same level as a watch like this, or even anywhere close, because even though the same techniques are being used, obviously there are different levels of competency when it comes to the people actually doing the work. But still, yeah, they do a nice job of it for sure, absolutely. And funnily enough, the next watch that I am reviewing is the Pittsman 2, and I've spoken to the manufacturers about their watch, and again, they use lapping machines with tin plates. So yeah, their watches, or their cases, again, are beautifully finished. Right, before I show you this watch alongside these two watches, let's just run through some specifications. I'll put the dimensions and weight on the screen, but yeah, I'll run through everything else now. So 316L stainless steel, ceramic bezel insert, NH35, applied indices. I suspect the loom's pretty good. The loom on this watch is incredible. You would expect it to be, because it is a premium dive watch by Seiko. You've got basically a Grand Seiko movement in here. And like I said, it's Zaratsu polished, and so they've gone all out with the loom on this watch. I'll do a loom comparison actually between all these three watches. It would be a bit awkward now if this one didn't perform very well. But anyway, 19mm lugs. I've actually messaged San Martin about that to find out why 19mm, because it does look a little bit thin between the lugs, doesn't it? That end link, I should say, not end leak, end link. And yeah, there's a bit of taper to it, but I think just a little bit more taper, 20mm down to whatever this is, would have looked a bit better. I've already talked about the clasp, unfortunately not the on-the-fly adjustment clasp, but still very nice clasp. I've seen it a million times though. This is not a bracelet that we've seen a million times from San Martin. Yeah, slightly different pin and collar, very, very easy to do though. There is, yeah, a little bit of resistance with the pins, but not much at all. Solid end links, solid links. Yeah, screw down crown, obviously a monoblock case. 200 meters, I think it's 200 meters. No, it's a 300 meter diver, which is actually quite rare for San Martin. They generally produce 200 meter divers, but there's no denying this case can carry that, can't it? It's yeah, quite substantial. Sapphire crystal, box crystal, double domed, AR coating, as you would expect, fairly obvious there. Blue hue look. What else? Now, bezel action, of course. 120 click, unidirectional. Not the best bezel action actually from San Martin. They are producing their bezels with a slightly different mechanism these days, which is much better. It's an improved mechanism, and some of their bezel actions are incredible. This one feels just a little bit flat. Yeah, the clicks aren't quite so crisp, but the alignment on this one seems to be pretty good. Look, no back play and pretty much perfect alignment. So yeah, I'm happy with that. Right, I've zoomed in so we can have a closer look at the bezel and the dial and the hands. The hands are quite interesting, aren't they? Capped seconds hand, which I love. I keep saying it, love that. Just finishes off the center of the dial beautifully. And interesting shape to the loom on the hour hand, isn't it? Yeah, definitely a little bit different to this watch. Again, I'll show you a side-by-side in a moment. Applied logo and applied indices, deeply filled with loom, I suspect. And they've sort of color coordinated the loom on this watch, which I don't mind. I know a lot of people aren't particularly keen on this sort of faux patina on the loom, but on this watch it just works, doesn't it? And beautifully done bezel, just a fairly simple matte black, sort of very dark grey dial. Nice balance to this dial actually, because the date complication has a sort of gold frame, so it sort of matches this applied index on the left, although I think the date complication would have looked a little bit better if it was color coordinated, maybe a black background with white text. But Yeah, no real complaints from me, to be honest. It looks pretty cool. Yeah, very nice. And while I'm still zoomed in, I'm just going to give you a closer look at the finishing of this case. For some reason, I keep focusing on the back of the watch, but it's just so unusual. And yeah, you'll see why in a minute when I show you the back of this monoblock case. It's definitely different. Very simple. And yeah, as you can tell, the finishing is very nice. Not up to the same standards as Grand Seiko, obviously, but still looks pretty good. Don't know why I keep focusing on the back, because the top looks nice as well, and so does the side. But look at the back. Oh, right, let's move on. So you may be wondering, why is he showing us an MM200 when this is clearly a homage of an MM300, because it has a monoblock case and the MM200 has a screw down case back? Well, I actually think San Martin have looked at both of these watches and cherry picked bits and pieces that they like, and they've sort of, well, made a bit of a Frankenwatch. They've made something that's a little bit different to both of them. Now, the similarities between these two watches are in the sizes of the bezels, and in particular the chapter rings and the dials. Some of the markers are quite similar as well, but yeah, it's really the case shapes and profiles at certain angles, which are quite similar, as you can see. Yeah, not too much difference between the cases at this angle. The bezels, the coin edge on the bezel, obviously quite similar. But really, it's, I think, more to do with the dial, the size of the dial, how close the dial is to the crystal as well. Yeah, I mean, they're not too dissimilar, are they? And now when you look at the MM300 alongside the SN0087, you really can see some fairly obvious differences when it comes to, well, primarily the dimensions and actually, well, just the weight and the size. I mean, this thing is an absolute beast. It's a monster. Love it. Absolutely love this thing. But yeah, it is just an incredibly substantial watch, and this thing feels light in comparison to this one. But yeah, look at the size of the dials and just how different they are in terms of how deep the dials sit in the case. The crystal on this watch actually sits lower than the bezel. Look, quite a different profile from the bottom, looking, well, sort of up the case, if that makes sense. Okay, there are some similarities in those flanks along the side, although this watch has this point, which the MM200 has, and yet the MM300 has this beautifully finished flat brushed surface separating these two polished surfaces. I'll show you the polished surfaces next to each other in a moment. But yeah, you can see that actually in some ways this watch has more in common with this watch, although these two are both monoblocks. Let me undo the bracelets and I'll show you side by side. And here is the MM300 and the San Martin from the back. And as you can see, a few similarities, but also a few differences. One of the differences that's standing out to me is the difference in color. It's quite obvious, isn't it? The San Martin is a sort of true stainless steel color, and the Seiko, this particular one, has DiaShield on it, which is a protective coating that Seiko uses to prevent steel from scratching. And yeah, as you can see, it gives the steel a sort of darker, dirtier look. But yeah, there's no denying the polished surfaces and just the overall finishing of this particular watch is superior to the San Martin, which you would wholeheartedly expect, given this Seiko has gone through the Zaratsu polishing process. But still, both look pretty impressive, don't they? Very cool. And here they all are side by side. You can certainly see how substantial and beefy the MM300 is when compared to these two watches, and how actually these two watches have perhaps a little bit more in common than you would expect. But yeah, some differences between all of them, some fairly obvious ones, making this watch, I think, a touch more appealing to those people that aren't fans of very accurate homage watches. This one is definitely sort of doing its own thing to some degree. So yeah, very cool. Right, let's wrap things up then with a lume comparison test. The watch on the left is obviously the Seiko MM300. The watch on the right is the Seiko MM200. And the watch in the middle is the San Martin SN0087. And I strongly suspect the San Martin is going to struggle. Not because San Martin watches just generally don't have good lume, but orange pigment, or this sort of faux patina effect, really does have a strong impact on the longevity or overall strength of lume, unfortunately. It looks nice during the day, but yeah, it does impact the lume, so I suspect this watch is really going to struggle. I'm doing the usual test, yeah, letting the watches sit there for 5 minutes. Obviously, I'll speed up the footage, and yeah, at the end of the 5 minutes, we'll know whether or not the lume is any good. Yeah, as we suspected, the two Seiko watches performing very well. I know from experience that the MM300 in particular does have really good lume. One of the best watches for lume I have ever seen. And yeah, the MM200 doesn't look too bad either. And yeah, as we suspected, the San Martin is struggling, which is a bit of a shame because, well, there's a lot to like about this watch. I really, really like it. Just a handful of fairly minor weaknesses, that missing on-the-fly adjustment in the clasp. Perhaps a color-coded date wheel would be nice. And yeah, the strength of the lume, not fantastic. Oh yeah, and those 19mm lugs. That is an odd one, isn't it? But there you go. Still fantastic value for money, this one. Just over $200. NH35 powered, 300 meter diver by San Martin. Beautiful. Love it. I still love it.